Okay, so moving on to our sub bass. Now it's very likely that this is just a regular 808 sample, but as with a lot of the other breakdowns I've done, I wanted to recreate this in a synth so you could see how it's done. And there's a lot of processing to get it close on this, and I don't even think I've got it exactly right. Let's just have a listen first of all. So let's go into Serum. And the biggest thing that took me so long to get right with this sound is finding the perfect wavetable. And in the end, even though it says J and O at the top there, I ended up having to make a new wavetable for this, which is what you can see in the middle here. So to edit the wavetable, you click on the pencil here. And normally what I would do is if you'd right click on the background and go to clear all, and it will take you back to just an empty row at the top. And you'll see we have our bins up here from 1 to 9. Now, a really important feature when you are editing these wavetables is to right click on the background and go down to the bottom and just turn on the scale frequency values by bin index. And if we were to look at another waveform, for example, a saw wave, if we have this turned off, you'll see a saw wave has this kind of downwards sloping shape where each bin lowers in volume. It's very, very hard to get this perfectly right, this shape, without the waveform looking or sounding weird. So by right clicking, when we turn this on, all of those frequencies are now just perfectly flat. And with this turned on, the overall shape of this sound was a lot closer to a triangle wave or a square wave. So that's why we focus on these harmonics here, 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. But I've added in some second, fourth, 6 and 8, some even harmonics too, and that's what that resulting waveform looks like. It does look a little bit like a square wave with a slight slope downwards. Now let me just turn off some of the processing. And this is what it sounds like before all of that processing. On the oscillator, we've got it set to unison of 2, and we've got the detune up a little bit as well. This is creating some nice stereo width in our sound. I have the filter turned on as a low pass 24, and I've got it assigned to envelope 3. The attack time isn't instantaneous. I added a little bit of an attack. So 10 millisecond attack, 918 millisecond decay, and 0% sustain. And all that's doing is it's just bringing down the volume of some of those upper harmonics as time goes on. Now, envelope 2 is being used to control the pitch of our oscillator here. Similar envelope shape, 10 millisecond attack, 78 millisecond decay though, which is very quick, and no sustain. And you can only see this if we go into the matrix, envelope 2, master tune, make sure it's on unipolar mode, and then the amount here is 15. And it's just adding that extra snap at the beginning of each of our notes to make it thump through like an 808 sound. I've got it set to mono, but not legato this time inside here. And as we said before, the pitch bend was very important in this track because it's what adds in that nice expression. And the pitch bend controls are in the bottom left of Serum here, and both are set to +3 and -3 on this sound. So into the effects, we've got a little bit of distortion inside here on the tube setting. This is doing such a small amount. There is also a filter in here as well, and it's just to remove some of the really high frequencies that come from changing the pitch from high to low very fast. So let's talk about the processing. And I always try to just use anything that's free generally, or a stock plugin that comes with Ableton or Logic, just because it's easy for you to follow along at home. But I couldn't find anything that worked as well as this plugin here called Decapitator by Soundtoys. And you probably might have heard of this already or already have it. The one reason I wanted to use this is because the distortion or drive it creates adds a lot of even numbered harmonics. Not a lot of saturators or distortion plugins add even harmonics in, as well as Decapitator does, at least anyway. So when we turn it on, and I'll turn the mix all the way up so you can hear really what it's doing. And it gives the sound more of that like wobbly effect. It's the best way I can describe it. But I didn't want this to be as it sounds, so I brought the mix down to about 45% here. So we're layering in some of that distortion into our track. Next up was OTT again, and I've gone for about 50% on this. just giving our bass sound a little bit more sustain. And next, I actually chose to use the new Raw plugin in Live 12. And there are a few others out there like Trash 2 and the new version of Trash. And I believe there's one called Rift as well that you could use for this process. So in the low, I've gone for 28%, set it to soft as it is by default, whereas on the medium, I've turned it up a little bit more so I can get a bit more mid-frequency distortion. I've left everything else as default here. The compression is still 25% too, and a little bit on the highs as well, but there aren't really many high frequencies apart from those artifacts there. Now next comes up probably the most complicated part of this whole recreation. So what I wanted to do is to split my sound up into the mid and the side components so I could process them separately. And this is what I've got here in Ableton in this audio effect rack. And I'll put this down in the description too for anyone that's using Ableton, because it is a useful tool to have. And you will be able to do this in other DAWs too, but you'll need to download a plugin that I'll talk about in a second. So in the effect rack, I've got two chains in here, and these are just essentially copies of the same track. And one of the tracks I've called this mid and one is side. And on the mid track, I've gone into the utility here and I've used utility and set it to this mid mode. And you can do this by right clicking on the dial and enabling mid side mode. And then I've turned the dial all the way so it's just the mid frequencies. And then on the sideband, I've just done the opposite. So same utility, but we're now just listening to the side frequencies. Those two combined signals together will make an overall nice wide bass sound, but when you listen to them on their own, they sound a little bit strange. And by doing this, we've separated now our mid and side bands. And I did double check to make sure that there isn't any weird phase cancellation by doing this splitting process. And there wasn't any phase cancellation. There might be a little bit now that we've added some of these plugins on here. On the side band, I've added a little bit of compression and a little bit of saturation. And the mid band is nice and clean. Nothing actually on the mid band. I just wanted to process the side band here. And some plugins will allow you to just do this in the plugin itself. If you were going to do this outside of Ableton, there is a plugin by Voxengo called MSED. And there's loads of ways in which you can use this MSED plugin. If you wanted to use it in the same way as what we're doing, you would stick the plugin on both your mid and side tracks. If you were on the mid channel, you'd mute the sides. And if you're on the sides, you would mute the mid and then just follow the same processing as we did then. And when they combine together outside of this chain, then it'll just sound like the original signal, but with that processing added to them. This has given us that extra bit of control. And it's not a massive difference, but it does make the bass sound nice and wide and give us those extra harmonics in that side band. And then finally, I've got a limiter on here, which I generally recommend to add on your bass track. And really all this is doing is it's removing a lot of that big spike at the beginning of our bass sound there, as you can see. And the final thing that we've added on here is this utility, which is going to have the bass mono setting turned on at 170 hertz here. And it's just going to make sure that our low end of our bass is nice and central in that mid band, and the LFO tool again on our bass. Now, when it comes to our drums, I'm not going to go into each individual drum here. I'm going to just mainly talk about the big parts. The one thing I wanted to point out with the kick drum though is I've grouped the kick drum to itself by right clicking and going to group. I've then added some extra chains in underneath and loaded the plugin external instrument in. And this is how I can send my sidechain MIDI signal to the LFO tool that I've used here. So every time the kick drum plays, it's also going to send a bit of MIDI through here into the main bass track and the LFO tool on that track. And then you don't ever need to have an extra sidechain track that you need to change. If you change your kick drum pattern, it's still going to send the same MIDI out to each of these sidechain effects as well. And the kick drum sample is quite short. I've taken a lot of the high frequencies out of this kick. It's not very snappy and it's got quite a lot of mid frequencies. There's a saturator on there and a little bit of compression with a long attack time as well to help focus the sound. The clap is a layer of two samples, a 707 clap and a rim shot. Very short rim shot just to add an extra percussive snap at the beginning. And I've gone quite extreme on this. I've added a pedal in there. Give it that nice crunchy feel. And I've also added the plugin wider, which is free, 45% there, as you can see, just to make the clap nice and wide. And I've also taken out some of the low frequencies with a filter here, just because I'm lazy. Probably should have done this with an EQ. In the tops group, this contains all of our hi-hats, this group here. They have got an EQ that spans across all of the hi-hats, helping them give a more consistent, similar tone to each other with a little bit of a high boost at the top. High cut to remove any super high frequencies and a low cut to get rid of the lows. I've got a compressor on here set to a very fast attack time, leveling out the volume. And then after this, I've added in a bit of parallel compression. So I've over compressed our sound. Very heavy compression, fast attack, fast release. And then I brought the dry wet down to something like 20%. And that's going to bring up some of the tails of the hi-hats and make them sound a bit fuller. And with the shaker loop, I've taken out some of the low frequencies with a filter and added some fast compression as well. And I've also added in a reverb in here, quite a short reverb with a lot of low cut taken out. And I've sent most of my clap to it and the tops. So we go over to our drum group here. We've got a glue compressor at the beginning here, which has the sidechain section open up with a sidechain EQ on. It's a high pass set to about 90 hertz there. And this is just making the compressor react less to some of the very, very low frequencies in our kick drum, because that's normally what gets squashed the most when using a compression technique like this. Let me turn these off. We've also got a bit of parallel compression after this as well. So similar to our tops, very fast attack and release, blending back the dry wet signal. Now it's a lot quieter, but that's just because I've not compensated the volume before and after this plugin, because then I just added a saturator on afterwards. So the saturator is doing quite a lot here. 14 decibel increase. And you can see on the meter here, when all those plugins are turned off, the maximum volume is about -6.6. With all of these then turned on, the volume is pretty much the same before and after, which shows how much these plugins are increasing the perceived loudness of our drums rather than the actual loudness. And then this auto filter here is automation. So let's talk about the vocals now, the few vocal samples that are in here. And the most interesting one really is this push vocal sample. And the interesting thing about it is it has this kind of echoey effect. In Ableton here, again, I've used an audio effect rack to do this, but you could use a send and return in Logic or any other DAW. And I've got a delay on here. It's pretty simple. It's just a quarter note delay. I've got 0 on the feedback because we only want one delay on stereo mode. And the dry wet is at full just because of the way it's set up in here. And the reason why I put this in an audio effect rack is because I've now used the auto pan to pan that delay left and right. And you might be thinking, well, we could use a ping pong for this. Set to a quarter note though, you'll always just get the left delay there. So the pan is just panning it left and right. There is also a Valhalla delay on before this. This is a fantastic delay plugin. It's one of the only ones that I can remember, which has a diffusion amount built in as well. I believe the Soundtoys plugin Echo Boy has a diffusion setting. I think it's called ambient. And at the moment it sounds like a reverb. The reason why I skipped it is because this is mainly used in the intro, which I'm going to come on to in a second. I've got a little bit of a boost with the high frequency. And then we've got auto filter and a utility, which once again have been used for automation in the beginning. The scream, pretty simple delay. Back and forth. I don't think it's exactly the same as the track, but it sounded good. The yo literally has nothing on it. Yeah. And then the pop just has a bit of EQ because I recorded that in. Now let's talk a little bit about the intro. In this intro section, there's a lot of automation going on. And the one particular effect I wanted to talk about was those drum samples that sound like they're slowing down over time. And the way I've done this is in the drum group. All the drums at the moment are getting sent to this Valhalla delay on our return track of B here. I ended up going through a few different delay plugins until I remembered about Valhalla delay, because the delay sound itself on the original track, they aren't exact copies of the original drum hits. They do have a little bit of a smoothing at the beginning of each of the delays. And whenever you hear that kind of slowing down of a delay, you'll normally get a bit of a pitch shift too, which should give you an idea that it is a delay plugin that's creating that effect. And so in this plugin, I've got the diffusion turned on, and then I've automated the delay time to slowly decrease like that. And that's giving it that nice slow down effect. And as you can hear, I sent that push sample to this as well. Both of these tracks have some filter automation going on. So on the drums, we have this bandpass slowly decreasing. And on the push sample, we have the filter going the other way. And the only other thing I've got in this project is on this top bass, I added in a big reverb on my return track of A, another Valhalla room as well. 8-second decay there, very, very long. But it's adding that really nice long tail, and then just automated it, of course, to turn off when we get into the drop, because we don't want that playing all the time. And that's essentially it, apart from a little bit of multi-band compression on the master to simulate it being mastered, and then a limiter as well just after this. As I've said throughout, all the links to anything that can be downloaded will be in the description. So there'll be the Serum patches. I will include like the custom wavetable as well. If you don't have one of the plugins that I've shown in this video, then just replace it with your own plugin. And there will be a plugin that will be similar inside your DAW. As I said at the beginning, I've been writing this live 12 course, which I'm still writing at the moment. So the videos won't be coming as regularly until I've completed that. And if you are interested in any online one-to-one tuition, it can be in any topic. It could be in sound design, advanced sound design like we've been doing today. Then make sure to take a look at our website, or get in touch on Instagram or YouTube, or you can drop me an email on our contact page on the website too. But thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one.